The silence was deafening. One moment the room buzzed with speculation, whispered rumors bouncing from one corner to the next, and the next, everything froze as a single line dropped like a bomb. The DNA results are in. For a split second, no one dared breathe. Eyes darted toward Melania Trump, waiting, wondering, anticipating. And then, in an eruption that shook even her fiercest critics, Melania exploded. Her voice cracked the tension wide open. No longer the carefully measured First Lady, no longer the composed figure behind the podium. This was raw emotion, fury unchained, a mother protecting her son. In that instant, the entire narrative shifted. What had begun as a smear, a whispered question of paternity, spiraled into one of the most unexpected confrontations Washington had seen in years. But this wasn't just about Barron Trump. This was about something bigger, the weaponization of family, the willingness to drag private lives into the brutal arena of politics. And just when it seemed the chaos would swallow the moment whole, another voice entered the fray. A voice that cut sharper than the accusations, a voice that carried the weight of evidence, facts, and fearless conviction. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. What she revealed didn't just dismantle the rumor, it exposed the entire strategy behind it, the deflection, the hypocrisy, the ugly machinery of political theater. And as she spoke, the stakes crystallized before everyone watching. This wasn't simply a fight over DNA. This was a battle over truth, dignity, and the line between public power and private lives. And the question became clear. In a world built on spectacle, who has the courage to stand up, shatter the script, and speak for what's real?
Washington, D.C. has always been a city of spectacle. Beneath the gleaming white dome of the Capitol and the echo of marble hallways, power is currency. And perception is everything. It was in this arena, polished, televised, and tightly controlled, that a storm was already brewing long before the DNA results were whispered into the public narrative. The backdrop was more than just a political hearing or a press briefing. It was a battlefield, where reputations are built, destroyed, and rebuilt in the space of a single headline. On this particular day, the atmosphere felt charged from the moment cameras rolled. Staffers rushed back and forth clutching folders, photographers adjusted their lenses, and reporters whispered into live microphones, promising viewers something extraordinary was about to unfold. Everyone sensed it. The air wasn't just thick with speculation, it was heavy with expectation. At the center sat Melania Trump. Her presence alone commanded attention. Composed in her signature tailored look, she projected the familiar, cool exterior the world had come to know. The careful smile, the unreadable expression, the air of restraint. But anyone watching closely could see the strain. Her hands clasped tighter than usual, her gaze sharper, her posture just a little too rigid. She was not here merely as a former First Lady. She was here as a mother, caught in a narrative she did not write. To her right, Donald Trump loomed, his body language betraying a different kind of tension. Defiant, restless, eager to dismiss any challenge. His allies, seated nearby, were equally restless, their eyes darting between Melania, the press gallery, and their own notes as if rehearsing lines that might soon be needed. Across the room, Democrats prepared their own strategies, waiting for an opening to pierce through the wall of bluster that so often defined Trump's defenses. But the story wasn't just about the Trumps. Enter Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't in the spotlight yet, but those who knew her reputation understood she had a way of seizing it without warning. Known for her sharp wit, unshakable composure, and relentless pursuit of truth, Crockett sat poised, her notes in order, her demeanor calm but ready. She had watched battles like this unfold before, but this one was different. Here, the stakes involved not only political maneuvering, but also the sanctity of family, a line many believed should never be crossed. The tension wasn't confined to the room itself. Outside, social media had already primed the battlefield. Rumors of Barron Trump's DNA had been swirling for weeks, stoked by shadowy accounts and amplified by partisan voices desperate for a scandal that could distract from deeper political issues. Memes, hashtags, and unverified screenshots painted the digital landscape with innuendo. By the time the cameras turned on in D.C., the online storm had already made its way into households, onto news tickers, and into whispered conversations. Everyone had an opinion, few had the truth. This was the collision point. On one side, Melania, visibly burdened yet ready to lash out if necessary. On the other, a crowd of critics, armed with insinuation and willing to drag a child into the ugliness of politics. Hovering in the middle was Jasmine Crockett, waiting, watching, calculating her moment to cut through the noise with something more powerful than speculation: facts. The atmosphere in the room reflected the larger conflict beyond it, a clash not only between political parties, but between decency and opportunism. The question hung unspoken in the air. Would the conversation spiral into a circus, fueled by rumor and rage? Or would someone redirect the spotlight back to truth, dignity, and accountability? As the first words of accusation cracked across the room, the underlying agendas became clear. For Trump's opponents, this was about pressing a nerve, exposing vulnerability, and showing the cracks in a family carefully curated for public consumption. For Trump's allies, it was about deflection, pushing blame elsewhere and weaponizing outrage. For Melania, it was personal, painfully personal. And that personal edge was about to erupt in ways no one fully anticipated. What began as a whisper outside the chamber had become a roar within it. The setting was locked, the players in place, the energy primed for combustion. All that was left was the spark, and when it came, it would ignite a confrontation powerful enough to ripple far beyond the marble walls of D.C.
It started quietly, almost innocuously, a subtle shift in tone, a carefully phrased question, the kind that doesn't land like a direct punch, but instead cuts deeper by implication. That's how rumors work in Washington. They're never shouted first, they're whispered, seeded, disguised as curiosity. And on this day, the whisper had grown into a demand for clarity about something both irrelevant and profoundly personal: Barron Trump's DNA. At first, the remarks were masked in faux concern. One lawmaker, leaning forward with the careful cadence of someone who knew their words would echo on primetime television, said, "The American people deserve transparency. They deserve to know the truth, even if it makes some uncomfortable." He didn't mention Barron's name at first, but everyone knew where he was going. The murmurs spread through the chamber like static electricity. Journalists began scribbling faster, cameras zoomed in, and heads turned toward the Trump table. Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, chin jutting defiantly, as though he had been expecting this line of attack. But Melania, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, had not. Her jaw tightened, her composure visibly cracking. The lawmaker pushed again. "If you claim family values, if you speak of legacy and lineage, then shouldn't those values withstand scrutiny? Isn't DNA the ultimate proof?" There it was. The insinuation, finally spoken aloud, a direct challenge to Barron's paternity, a line so deeply personal it felt like a punch to the gut from Melania. Her reaction was instantaneous. Before anyone else could move, she shot forward in her chair, her voice ringing out, sharp and unrestrained. "How dare you drag my son into this? He is a child, my child, and you will not use him for your games." The eruption caught the room off guard. This was not the carefully guarded First Lady the public remembered, smiling politely behind podiums or standing silently at Trump's side. This was a mother in open fury, her mask stripped away, cameras locked on her face, capturing every flicker of rage, every syllable spat like a warning. The chamber shifted instantly. Allies leaned in, whispering frantically to one another, unsure how to reel the moment back. Opponents smirked, satisfied that the provocation had landed, that the emotional explosion would dominate headlines. But beyond the political calculations, there was something raw and undeniable about Melania's response. For the first time in years, she was not simply adjacent to Trump's story. She was at the center of it, and the stakes were personal. Donald Trump, for his part, tried to take control. He slammed his palm on the table and barked, "Don't talk about my family. Don't you dare." But the damage was already done. The narrative was out there, and attempts to shout it down only fanned the flames. Meanwhile, across the room, Jasmine Crockett was watching closely. She had seen this playbook before, the tactic of dragging someone's personal life into the spotlight to distract from real accountability. But Crockett also understood the danger of silence. If no one redirected the conversation, if no one called out the strategy for what it was, the smear would stick. The escalation was fast and deliberate. Another voice chimed in, this time less subtle. If there's nothing to hide, why not prove it? Why not show the results? Unless, of course, the insinuation hung in the air, toxic, ugly. Melania's face reddened. She stood up, trembling with a mix of rage and hurt. "You will not touch my son. He is innocent. He has nothing to do with your politics, your lies, or your pathetic need for attention." The chamber was now a battleground. Some gasped, others applauded, and the media gallery lit up like fireworks, reporters furiously typing headlines. Melania erupts over Barron DNA question. The setup was complete. What began as a calculated dig had exploded into a full-blown spectacle. But what made it so volatile wasn't just the question itself, it was what it represented. The willingness of politicians to weaponize the most private, sacred parts of life, family, children, relationships, in the pursuit of power. It wasn't just about Barron anymore. It was about the very idea of boundaries in political warfare. And in that chaos, the stage was perfectly set for an intervention. Because when the smoke began to clear and the room searched for direction, it was Jasmine Crockett who would seize the moment. She wasn't reacting out of rage. She wasn't lashing out. She was preparing to deliver a blow, not with emotion, but with clarity, with evidence, with the kind of moral authority that changes the entire trajectory of a conflict. The initial conflict had served its purpose, to provoke, to destabilize, to drag the Trump family into the mud. But in doing so, it also opened a door, one that Crockett was more than ready to step through.
For a moment, it felt as if the chamber would collapse under the weight of its own chaos. Melania's voice still echoed, her fury still vibrating in the air. Donald Trump bellowed about respect. Allies shouted in protest, and opponents reveled in the spectacle. Reporters' fingers clattered against keyboards, already shaping headlines for the evening news. The DNA accusation had done its work. It had shifted the spotlight entirely onto the Trump family, dragging Barron into a fight he never asked for. But then, through the noise, came a new voice, steady, deliberate, and cutting through the uproar like a scalpel. "What you're not going to do," said Jasmine Crockett, leaning into her microphone with an expression equal parts calm and unflinching, "is weaponize a child to score political points." The room stilled. Not silent. The air was still buzzing with tension, but the volume dropped, like an audience caught mid-clap when someone unexpected takes the stage. Crockett's tone wasn't loud, but it carried authority, the kind that didn't need to shout to command attention. She adjusted her glasses, shuffled her notes with practiced ease, and continued. "We are here to discuss policy. We are here to discuss accountability.
What we are not here to do is drag the son of a former First Lady into a circus designed to distract from the issues at hand. That is beneath this chamber, beneath our offices, and frankly, beneath the dignity of the people we represent. Heads turned. Even those who had been fueling the accusation looked unsettled. Crockett wasn't merely defending Melania or Barron. She was reframing the entire narrative. By calling out the tactic itself, she exposed the DNA question for what it was, not an honest inquiry, but a political weapon. Crockett leaned forward again, her voice sharpening. What you're not going to do is, if you want to talk about DNA, then let's talk about accountability. Let's talk about the strands of truth that this nation has been demanding for years. Let's talk about the genetic makeup of corruption, the inherited privilege, the lies that have been passed down and recycled in this very chamber. The shift was palpable. Suddenly, the energy in the room wasn't directed at Melania's fury or Trump's bluster, but at Crockett's words. The spectacle was being reframed before their eyes. Reporters lifted their heads, cameras refocused, and those who had come expecting another tabloid headline realized they were witnessing something different, a dismantling. Melania, still standing, turned her gaze toward Crockett. For the first time in the ordeal, her face softened slightly. Someone had finally taken the burden off her shoulders. Someone else was drawing the line in the sand. Crockett's reputation preceded her. Known for her sharp cross-examinations and refusal to be bullied, she wasn't just another politician taking her turn at the mic. She was a lawyer, a congresswoman, and a woman who had built her career by standing up to exactly this kind of theater. Her words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were backed by credibility, by a track record of fearlessly calling out hypocrisy. As she continued, Crockett pivoted the focus entirely. We sit here while families across America struggle with bills, with health care, with safety, and yet some of you choose to waste this platform by peddling rumors about a child. A child. That tells the American people everything they need to know about where your priorities lie. The audience shifted again. Gasps, murmurs, even applause from a few corners. Social media feeds lit up instantly with clips of Crockett's words, hashtags forming in real time. Hashtag Crockett exposes, hashtag protect children, hashtag not your propaganda. Opponents squirmed. They wanted Melania's explosion to dominate the cycle, but now Crockett was seizing it, turning it into a teachable moment. And there was nothing more dangerous in politics than an opponent who could reframe your attack into your own indictment. One by one, Crockett dismantled the DNA insinuation, not by debating its details, because doing so would validate it, but by exposing the cruelty of even raising it. She made clear that the tactic itself revealed more about the attackers than it ever could about Melania or Barron. This chamber is supposed to be a place of debate, not degradation. We are supposed to fight for the future of children, not drag them through the mud. And if you think the American people don't see through this kind of stunt, you are gravely mistaken. By the time she finished, the room no longer resembled the circus it had been minutes before. The energy had changed. Melania sat back down, visibly calmer. Trump, still scowling, sensed the momentum slipping from his grasp. And Crockett, without raising her voice, had managed to command the entire stage. The turning point wasn't just in what she said, but in how she said it. Measured, factual, and devastating in its simplicity. Crockett hadn't merely intervened, she had redefined the terms of the debate. And for the viewers at home, the message was unmistakable. This wasn't about DNA. This was about decency, integrity, and the courage to call out games for what they are.
Jasmine Crockett had done more than interrupt the circus. She had reset the terms of the conversation. The smear about Barron's DNA, so carefully designed to dominate the headlines, was now exposed as nothing more than a political ploy.
But Crockett wasn't finished. She knew that to truly neutralize the attack, she needed to replace rumor with substance, noise with truth. She leaned into her microphone again, calm but firm. "Let's be clear," she began, her words deliberate. "This is not about DNA. This is about distraction. Every time this chamber edges closer to accountability, someone throws up smoke. And today, that smoke took the form of a child's name." The weight of her words hung heavy. The chamber, moments ago buzzing with accusations and emotional eruptions, was now silent except for the sound of Crockett's voice. She shuffled her papers, not because she needed them, but because the gesture underscored her preparation. Unlike those hiding behind rumor, she came armed with receipts. "So let's talk about real evidence," she continued. "Let's talk about what has been documented, investigated, and proven. Because while some of you are obsessed with gossip, the American people are waiting for answers about corruption, finances, and accountability." She held up a folder, flipping it open for the cameras. The gesture was calculated, a visual reminder that her case was grounded in fact. She pointed to documented reports, timelines, and public records, each one underscoring her point. The DNA narrative wasn't about truth, it was about diversion. "You want to talk about family values?" she pressed, her voice gaining momentum. "Then explain the policies that have torn families apart at the border. Explain the children who were separated from their parents and left without answers. Explain the values that prioritize power over people." The power of her defense was that it transcended the immediate smear. She didn't waste time defending Melania's personal life, detail by detail. That would have only legitimized the attack. Instead, she broadened the lens, showing how the DNA rumor was one tactic in a much larger pattern of deception. For the audience watching at home, it was a revelation. What had seemed like a scandalous personal drama was now reframed as part of a systemic strategy, the use of spectacle to overshadow accountability. Crockett's words gave viewers a way to understand the bigger picture. Turning directly toward her colleagues, she delivered the most devastating line yet. "The truth is, you dragged Barron Trump into this because you don't want to face the facts about yourselves. You are terrified of accountability, so you hide behind gossip. But facts don't disappear because you refuse to face them." The room shifted again. Even those who had joined in on the DNA insinuations now looked uneasy. Crockett had managed to pivot the spotlight from Melania's private family to the hypocrisy of her attackers. As she spoke, she wove in stories from her own experience. She talked about families in her district who had faced smear campaigns, parents whose children were bullied because of politics they never chose. She reminded everyone that beyond the marble walls and the TV cameras were real people. People who understood all too well the pain of seeing loved ones dragged through the mud for someone else's gain. "Barron Trump is not a weapon," she declared. "He is not a distraction. He is not your headline. He is a child. And if you can't respect that, then you don't deserve the trust of the people you claim to serve." The revelation wasn't just in the evidence she presented, but in the moral clarity she brought. Crockett exposed not only the falseness of the DNA claim, but also the deeper truth that dragging children into political fights is a sign of weakness, not strength. By the time she finished, the room felt transformed. Melania, who had entered the chamber visibly tense and left shaken by the attack, now sat more composed. She had an unlikely ally in Crockett, someone who had spoken not for her family alone, but for every family threatened by the politics of humiliation. For Trump's allies, the damage was undeniable. What was meant to humiliate Melania had turned into a showcase of their own desperation. And for Crockett, it was another defining moment, a demonstration of how preparation, courage, and truth could dismantle even the most vicious attacks. The revelation was clear. This wasn't about DNA. It was about dignity. And in defending that dignity, Crockett had not only neutralized the smear, but exposed the machinery behind it.
When Jasmine Crockett finished, the chamber was no longer the same place it had been only minutes earlier. The smear about Barron had lost its bite, the whispers had quieted, and the energy of the room was different. The attack that had once put Melania on the defensive had been flipped, exposed as cheap theater. Yet all eyes turned back to her, because everyone was waiting for her next move. For a moment, Melania sat still, her gaze lowered, her hands pressed together tightly on the table. It was a picture of composure rebuilding itself after being shattered. The earlier eruption had revealed her raw anger, but now, with Crockett's words clearing the air, she had a chance to reclaim her voice not as a reaction, but as a statement. She rose slowly from her chair. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail, the determined set of her jaw, the calm in her eyes, the subtle tremor in her hand that betrayed the emotional storm she was still navigating. When she began to speak, her voice was lower than before, deliberate, carrying the weight of both vulnerability and strength. "My son," she said, pausing briefly, "is not your story. He is not your distraction. He is not a weapon for your agenda. He is my child. He is our child, and he deserves to be left out of your games." The room held its breath. This wasn't the fiery outburst from before. This was controlled, deliberate, a mother speaking with dignity after having been tested in the harshest public arena. Melania continued, "I understand politics is ugly. I understand people will say things about me, about my husband, about anyone who chooses this life. But I will not accept, I will never accept, that children must be dragged into it." Her tone shifted slightly, carrying not only personal pain, but also resolve. "When you speak of family values, remember that children are not tools. They are not pawns. They're not bargaining chips. They are human beings, and every parent in this room, every parent watching, knows the truth of what I am saying." She gestured briefly toward Crockett. "And I want to thank those who understand this, who are willing to stand for what is right even when it is not easy. It is not about party. It is not about politics. It is about humanity." For the first time in years, Melania's words did not feel rehearsed or staged. They felt lived. They felt earned through the very fire she had just endured. Reporters scribbled not just because it was newsworthy, but because it was powerful. Her closing line was the one that resonated most. "I am many things in the public eye, but first, I am a mother. And as a mother, I will not be silent when my child is used as a shield for lies." The silence that followed didn't feel empty, it was heavy with respect, even from some who had little love for her. Crockett had provided the defense, but Melania's response gave the moment permanence. Together, they had shifted what had begun as an attack into a moment of clarity, a reminder of the boundaries that should never be crossed.
The moment spread like wildfire. Within minutes, clips of Melania's response, framed by Jasmine Crockett's defense, were plastered across every major news outlet and social media feed. Headlines screamed variations of the same theme: Melania strikes back, Crockett defends Barron, and DNA attack backfires. On Twitter, hashtags trended globally. Hashtag hands off Barron, hashtag Crockett exposes, hashtag Melania speaks. Supporters rallied, some praising Melania's dignity, others hailing Crockett's courage. For once, two very different women found themselves cast as allies in the public imagination. Parents flooded social media with their own stories. Some wrote about their children being bullied because of politics. Others recalled how their families had been dragged through the mud by rumors. The common theme was clear. The public understood the pain of seeing children caught in battles they never chose. Melania's words had struck a chord far beyond Washington. Of course, backlash came just as quickly. Trump's fiercest critics accused Melania of playing the victim, claiming her outburst was staged to win sympathy. Conspiracy theorists doubled down on the DNA rumor, arguing that her anger was proof of something hidden. But even in the noise, something had shifted. The mainstream narrative was no longer about Barron's DNA. It was about the ethics of dragging children into political wars. Cable news ran split screens. On one side, Crockett's piercing words about dignity. On the other, Melania's declaration as a mother. Analysts debated whether this would mark a turning point in how families were treated in politics. For once, the outrage cycle had not consumed the substance. It had elevated it. Inside Washington, the fallout was just as stark. Those who had pushed the DNA insinuation faced quiet but pointed criticism, even from within their own ranks. Colleagues questioned whether the tactic had gone too far, whether the damage to their credibility outweighed any political gain. The smear that was meant to weaken the Trumps had instead emboldened their defenders and given Crockett a national platform. For Melania, the impact was deeply personal. She returned home to an outpouring of support. Letters from parents, messages from strangers, and a renewed sense of empathy she hadn't felt in years of often cold public life. For once, she wasn't seen merely as Donald Trump's shadow. She was seen as a mother who had spoken with raw honesty in defense of her son. For Crockett, the moment became a defining one in her career. Clips of her intervention circulated as proof of her courage, her clarity, her refusal to be intimidated by political games. She was invited onto talk shows, praised in op-eds, and heralded by her supporters as the kind of leader the country needed more of, someone willing to cut through spectacle and stand for truth. But the impact went beyond individual reputations. It sparked a broader conversation about the ethics of political warfare. Should children ever be mentioned in political debates? Was there a line between transparency and cruelty? Advocacy groups used the moment to push for stronger protections against dragging minors into the public arena. What had begun as a tawdry rumor had ignited a national reckoning.
When the dust finally settled, the story of Melania's explosion and Jasmine Crockett's intervention was no longer about DNA tests, rumors, or the back and forth of partisan bickering. It became something deeper, something that touched on universal truths about family, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right. At its core, this moment revealed the difference between spectacle and substance. The spectacle was easy to see. Headlines screaming scandal, whispers about Barron, the viral clips designed to spark outrage. But substance came from the people who refused to let the spectacle win. From Crockett's decision to call out the cruelty of the smear to Melania's steady declaration that her son was not a pawn. That contrast matters because our culture often rewards the loudest voices, not the truest ones. In a media environment built on clicks and outrage, it is easy for lies to travel faster than facts. But here was proof that when someone with credibility, conviction, and courage steps up, the tide can shift. Crockett's words didn't just defend a child, they reminded the entire country that decency still has a place, even in politics. And then there's the lesson from Melania herself. For years, she has been seen by many as distant, detached, even complicit in her husband's chaos. But in this moment, stripped of polish and protocol, she reminded people that beneath every public role is a private, human identity. She was not the first lady, not a campaign accessory, not a tabloid figure. She was a mother. And when she said, "My son is not your story," it rang true for every parent who has ever feared for their child's safety, reputation, or future. This is why the moment mattered beyond politics. It forced us to confront the question of how we treat people when the cameras are on, and more importantly, when they're off. The deeper message here is about respect. Respect for boundaries, for truth, and for the humanity of those we disagree with. Too often, political battles dehumanize their targets. They turn opponents into caricatures, families into props, and children into weapons.
But when that happens, we all lose, because if dignity can be stripped from one family, it can be stripped from any family. The ripple effect of Crockett's intervention and Melania's response can already be felt. Parents wrote letters saying they felt seen. Viewers who normally dismissed politics as theater admitted they felt moved. Even some critics of the Trumps acknowledged that children should remain off-limits. That matters, because it signals that decency is not completely lost in the noise. But there's another layer to this moment: the importance of having advocates who are willing to vouch for your character when you are under attack. Preparation meets opportunity, as the saying goes, and Crockett was ready. She knew her facts, she had her moral compass, and she didn't hesitate. Because of her intervention, the narrative changed course. This teaches us a larger truth. We all need allies in life, people who will speak up when we can't, who will defend us when we're too overwhelmed to defend ourselves. Crockett didn't have to intervene. She could have stayed silent. But by stepping in, she reminded us of the power of solidarity, the strength that comes from someone saying, "No, that's not right, and I won't let you get away with it." For anyone watching, the lesson is simple but profound. Don't underestimate the difference you can make by standing up, even in small ways. Whether it's in politics, at work, in school, or in your community, there will always be moments when lies, gossip, or cruelty threaten to overshadow truth. And when those moments come, it takes courage to speak up. But when you do, the impact can ripple farther than you realize. Finally, the significance of this moment extends into the future. It will be remembered not as a scandal about Barron, but as a story about what happens when a false narrative is confronted with truth. It will serve as a reminder that children should never be used as shields, and it will stand as an example of how dignity, even when shaken, can be restored through honesty, empathy, and strength. So the deeper message is clear. In a world that thrives on tearing people down, defending someone's humanity is a radical act. Standing up for truth when lies dominate is an act of courage, and remembering that behind every headline is a real person with real family and real feelings is an act of compassion we can't afford to lose. Because at the end of the day, beyond the politics, beyond the rumors, beyond the cameras, what remains is the simple truth. Dignity matters, decency matters, and speaking up for what's right will always matter.
As the story of Melania's explosion and Jasmine Crockett's intervention echoes beyond the chamber, we're left with more than just a viral clip or a fleeting headline. We're left with a choice. Because moments like these don't just belong to politicians, first ladies, or congresswomen. They belong to all of us. They ask us, how will we respond when the truth is under attack? How will we react when someone we care about is being unfairly dragged through the mud? Will we stay silent? Or will we step forward? Think about what we witnessed. A smear designed to humiliate was transformed into a powerful reminder that dignity can prevail. A mother who had been reduced to tabloid caricatures reclaimed her voice, not through rage alone, but through strength and clarity. And a congresswoman, armed with conviction and facts, changed the trajectory of the conversation by daring to speak truth in the face of lies. That is not just a political story. That is a human story. And it's one we can all learn from. Every single one of us has a sphere of influence. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's your workplace, maybe it's your classroom, your community, or even just your social media feed. Somewhere in your life, there will come a moment when someone is being misrepresented, bullied, or targeted unfairly. In that moment, you will have a choice: to watch it unfold or to intervene. You don't need to be a congresswoman to make a difference. You don't need cameras or microphones. Sometimes all it takes is one voice saying, "That's not true. That's not fair. That's not right." One voice can shift the narrative. One voice can give someone the strength to stand taller. This is the lasting significance of what happened. It proves that the ripple effect of standing up for what's right is real.
It proves that lies don't always win. And it proves that when dignity and truth collide with cruelty and spectacle, there is still hope for decency to rise. So here's the challenge. Take this story with you. Let it remind you that behind every headline is a human being. Let it push you to defend others when you see them being misrepresented. Let it inspire you to become the kind of ally who steps up in the crucial moment, even when it feels risky or uncomfortable. Because if we all chose silence, the smear would have stood. If Crockett had stayed quiet, the lie would have spread. And if Melania hadn't chosen to reclaim her voice, the narrative would have remained in the hands of those who wanted to use her family for their own ends. Decency doesn't just survive on its own. It survives because people fight for it. And if you believe in that fight, if you believe that these stories matter, then don't let this moment stop here. Share it. Talk about it. Be part of the conversation that reminds others why truth and dignity matter. And if you want more stories like this, stories that go beyond the headlines, stories that unpack the deeper lessons behind the chaos, then make sure you hit that subscribe button and join this community. Because here, we don't just chase clicks, we chase clarity. We don't just amplify the noise, we cut through it. And together, we create a space where truth, courage, and dignity are not just buzzwords, but real principles we live by. So as you leave this video, ask yourself, what will I do the next time I see someone being used, mocked, or lied about? Will I scroll past, or will I be the one voice that makes a difference? That's your call to action. That's the lesson of this moment. And that's why we'll keep telling these stories, because the world doesn't change when we stay silent. It changes when we speak. Thank you for watching. Stand tall, speak truth, and I'll see you in the next video.